Welcome to Pure Intuitive Talk with me, Trish Smith. I'm a multi-dimensional channeler sharing my gift to assist others to connect and work with their whole being, helping bring them into a beautiful way of high-frequency living. Immerse yourself in an hour of nourishment that feeds your spiritual journey and invites you to embrace your empowered soul. You'll feel armed with new understandings for how to shift from pain to love as we explore topics from shamanic sound healing to gut health. Are you ready to take accountability for the impact that we have on the world around us and learn new tools and techniques to feel whole again? Of course you are, and you're in the right place. Pure Intuitive Talk starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith. You're listening to the Transformation Network. And today we're talking about moving through fear and letting love win. So really, honestly, at the end of the day, what's getting in the way of love winning? Our fear, our blocks, us allowing the fear to get into the way and allowing those blocks to stop us from doing the things that we're passionate about, or telling someone how we really feel about them, or having an important conversation that would make amends with someone that we care about. There's obviously a million examples of ways that we can allow fear to get into our head and get into our hearts and take over our body and allow the anxiety to riddle us to the point where we've become paralyzed and we're not moving forward into the places that we are called to be moved into. For example, this show for me is hard for me to do. I have a fear of talking in front of audiences and in front of people. And so I had to get myself to move through that. And I just feel the fear and do it anyways, right? So a couple of things about fear. There's healthy fear, as we know, and there's unhealthy fear. And all of us know that healthy fear has been installed in our programming and our wiring as a human being to keep us safe. So there is the fear where we're supposed to be paying attention to our surroundings, and we are supposed to be able to move into action very quickly if we're in danger. And so our wiring has been placed as such. And it's important, and we're all grateful for it. But I think most of us who experience more fear than that, maybe anxiety, maybe panic attacks. I suffer from PTSD, so I get plenty of anxiety on a regular basis, sometimes more than others. However, I have developed the tools and learned the tools to work through it, and also developed the courage, because it just takes a whole lot of courage. Let's be honest. It takes a whole lot of courage to decide that we're not going to allow our fear to get in the way of things that are important to us, or our calling, or our relationships. I think a big one is our calling. So a lot of us have that burning desire inside of us, and we know what we're supposed to be doing, and we know what feels in alignment to our soul. And then the fear steps in. And what if I'm not good enough? And what if my message is misunderstood? And what if everybody laughs at us? And all of the other things. What if I can't afford it? There's so many reasons why we let fear get in our way. What if we'll be rejected, right? So when it comes to healthy versus unhealthy fear, it's important that we are capable of discerning which is which. And it's important that we take the time to acknowledge when our fear has become unhealthy and take proper steps to find ourselves willing to take steps forward regardless of the fear. There's plenty of tools out there. I know we all have tools to help with our anxiety. Some people use medication, some people use breathing techniques, but there's lists and lists of tools that we can use to help ourselves move through the anxiety, even bring it down a few notches to where our anxiety is able to be moved through. Sometimes we experience panic attacks, and in those moments, we're only able to breathe. Been there, done that more times than I can count. But if we can reduce our anxiety enough that we can move through the fear, then we can allow that love to win. Because underneath all of the blocks, underneath all of our fears, underneath all of our insecurities is our true nature. And our true nature is love. Our true nature is light, and it's excited to be alive, and it wants to share, and it wants to connect, and it wants to feel loved. And unfortunately, our mind can get in the way of allowing those things to occur in our lives if we allow it to. By acting on the things that are coming from within, then we can move through the fear, and we can allow those things to take place, right? So for myself, being a medium, that was something that was really hard for me to talk to people about. I was afraid to tell people that, yeah, I talk to dead people. Your a dead relative contacted me. They'd like to give you a message. So that was an interesting one for myself to go through. And there's so many ways and so many things in my life that I have had to feel that fear and walk through it anyhow. And there are some places in my life that I didn't have the courage to step out in faith. And there's some things in my life that I look back on and think, man, if I had just had the courage, things would have turned out so differently. And so I think for myself, not wanting to live with regrets and knowing that most of us don't, that it's important that we find the tools to be able to help ourselves be willing to step forward. So for myself, being a medium, I know that we have all of this unseen help. I know in my practice, when I sit with my clients, that I have never, ever sat down with a client who is having an experience where they're hoping to get in contact with a relative or a friend that has passed away. Not one time have I sat down with a client and somebody didn't show up. Our unseen help is always there. Our unseen help is supporting us. We don't feel them. We don't see them. We don't hear them. Well, some of us do. But they're there. They're there, and they're helping us, and they're supporting us. And so Dr. Maya Angelou had once said, when you go out on that stage, or when she goes out on that stage, or when you go to do that hard thing, take them with you, right? Take your unseen help with you. Know that they're there. Know that you're feeling them. Know that they've got you. They're supporting you, and it's going to be okay. And the nice thing is about taking that step out in faith, about not allowing the fear to get into the way, that we get to make the difference in the world. We get to be the ones in charge of letting love win. So if we're able to feel the fear, walk through it, then we get to the other side, and we get to have the experience of the mended friendship, the mended relationship. We get to have the experience of coming and telling someone how we feel about them, and them saying, wow, I didn't know that. I'm so grateful you told me. So there's so many beautiful things that I believe a lot of us store inside because we're afraid of feeling vulnerable. And if we're being honest, we're all vulnerable. So we can tell ourselves these things that make us feel like we're not vulnerable, and we can build that shield over our heart and, again, believe that we're protected, right? So we're allowing our heart to become hardened, and we're being careful, and we feel like we can't trust people. But at the end of the day, we can get hurt whether we're protecting our heart or not. So really, not protecting our heart, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, is a space that we find that we're able to make deeper and more meaningful connections with one another. And love wins. Love wins when we do that. So I myself, I'm pretty silly. I'm pretty silly. So I do tell my friends how I feel about them. I do make it super weird. But I think it's important that we do that. And I love being here and getting to have interviews with good friends of mine. I've had a few of my friends on this show that have been through some pretty crazy rides in their lives. And I have so much admiration for them, and they inspire me. And I'm grateful that I've made that very clear to them. If something happens to me, I think that those things that I wanted to say have been said. And when more things come up, I'll make sure that I say them. And sometimes it does take the courage. But it's important. And I think that if we know how one another really feels, then we get to have that. And I think it's a gift for us to share with each other how important one another is. And again, love wins. And I am all about love. I am all about love winning. That's all I want to see. I want to see love win. So that's why I'm dedicating this whole hour to talking about love and giving some tools and techniques on how to move through the fear so that we can let love win. We'll be going to a break in a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the Transformation Network. Thank you for listening to me, Trish Smith, your host of Pure Intuitive Talk. When we get back from our break, we'll continue talking about feeling the fear and doing it anyways. And we'll be considering why fear is so loud and why is love so quiet, right? And using our own intuition to tune into those frequencies so that we can operate from that place of love rather than the place of fear. So stay tuned. We'll get back and discuss that in just a minute. Hey, everybody. Thank you for staying tuned. You're listening to Trish Smith with Pure Intuitive Talk, and you're listening to Transformation Talk Radio. Today, we're talking about fear blocking love. So we're talking about how we allow, because that's really the truth of it, is us allowing that fear to block the love that actually wants to be expressed, and the love that wants to be fulfilled, and the love that wants to go into action. What happens typically is that us as human beings are blocking it. We're the ones getting in our own way. We're the ones getting in the way of our calling. We're the ones getting in the way of our own relationships. Yes, often there's a person involved in our relationship that maybe causes more strife in the relationship than the other one, but typically it takes both of us, and we need to make sure that we're each doing our own work in any friendship, any relationship, whether it's with our spouse, our children, our parents, our friends, no matter our neighbor. We just have to make sure that we're taking accountability for our own actions and our own thoughts and feelings and projections. That way we're doing our part to not allow fear to get in the way of our relationships and or our passions. So that being said, question of the day: why is fear so loud? Why is fear taking over our mind? And why is fear consuming us? And love is so hard, right? To hear that still small voice, that quiet little, it's gonna be okay. It's interesting because that fear will take over sometimes in the mind, and then we have to muster up everything inside of us to take control over the mind and change our own mindset. When, for a lot of us, and it would be so much easier, wouldn't it, if that part was so much louder and the fear was, real quiet, and we're like, hey, pipe down. The good news is that with practice, we do shift that mindset. So our body is responding, right? So for myself, having PTSD, when my PTSD is triggered, my brain starts operating from the fight or flight place. So knowing that and learning to manage it over the last 20 years, I have a lot of tools and techniques that I use for shifting my mindset, feeding that place of love and light and security and comfort and joy and ease. But it's a practice. It's a practice like anything else. And so So if we're projecting our fear onto our reality, then our vision is skewed. So depending on our mindset, depending on if that fear is really loud and it's taking over and our body is responding to it, because our body is going to respond to our brain. Now we have maybe our hands are shaking, our heart is pumping. For myself, when I'm triggered in my PTSD, my shoulders will clench in. So our body starts to become paralyzed by the fear. And then it takes a lot of work to go back in with our higher self from our soul place and get that brain back in check. So utilizing the love within ourselves to get the body calmed down, to talk to the body from the brain in a way that a parent would talk to a child who is scared, right? So we can go in and calm our body down. We can use breathing techniques. I like using the 3-part breath. 3-part breathing technique works really, really well. For that, we inhale through the nostrils. We draw our breath all the way down into the bottom of our bellies. We fill our belly with oxygen first. We fill our lower rib cage with oxygen second. And we fill our upper chest with oxygen third. And we exhale completely. So if we're practicing this type of breathing technique, we're triggering or stimulating our vagus nerve to send messages to our central nervous system to calm down. So that's one of the tools that I use if I've gotten myself into a place where I'm experiencing anxiety or a panic attack. Clearly, sometimes it's not myself getting myself into that place. Things happen. But there's so many different tools and techniques out there that we can use to help the body come back into homeostasis so that we can then start working with our mind to override the fear. So that being said, when we're in a fear place, if we are operating from that fear place, we have to be very careful about discerning whether or not we're projecting our fears onto those around us. For example, if I am afraid because my child is walking across a log over a river, I'm afraid. My child has pure confidence. He's having a great time. So if I start calling out to him, be careful, you're going to slip and fall. That's my projection. Where he's living from is he's walking on this log. He's excited. He knows he's got it. He feels strong. He feels stable. He's in his own body. And so now I have put my fears onto them, right? So we do that in relationships. We have sometimes decided that the other person doesn't care or they're upset with us. And sometimes that's true. And sometimes it's coming from a place of our fears being projected onto our reality. So I think it's important that we acknowledge where we're at with ourselves so we can always tune in, go inside and take a look in the mirror, go inside. Is it me? Am I projecting my fear onto my relationship? Or is this in fact a situation that the reality is I am not safe, another person is not safe? Because sometimes our fears are really, they're just not real. They're not true. They're not real. And we can make up stories in our own minds and then believe that they are. And then trust me, nobody wins when that happens. So we want to take that time. We want to take that time to stop, think, tune in, discern. Am I projecting my own fears, or is this the reality of the situation? Before taking action into a situation or a circumstance or a relationship or a conversation. So it's important that we're not putting that on people if it's not coming from them, it's coming from within our own fears. So as important as that is, it's also important to remember when we're projecting our fears, are we projecting them onto our dreams? Are we projecting our fear onto a dream that's calling us? And so for myself, working with spirit had asked me to start my practice. Spirit had asked me to start doing this radio show. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. I am afraid, again, I've said earlier about talking in front of an audience, speaking in public. And so being a medium, it was interesting because Dr. Martin Luther King came through for me, and he had a good conversation with me, and I'm forever grateful. And that's the fun part about being a medium, is you get to have conversations that you would never get to have with, obviously he passed before I was born. So I wouldn't have been able to have a conversation like that with him in person. But his point to me was, when we had the conversation, was, what if he allowed fear to get in the way of his calling? And so it was a much longer conversation, but that was really the gist of it. And so knowing that Spirit is asking me to do this and asking me to talk to people and help them understand how important it is that we love and that we answer those callings, I had to move through my own fear. And fortunately, I'm able to hear my unseen help. And I was given that very valuable advice from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is not in body. But again, I'm forever grateful for his teachings. And so here I am, and I'm doing it, and I'm moving through the fear. And the people in my life, I hope that I'm able to set an example for them of moving forward and doing what God is calling us to do, regardless of whether we feel like we are capable, regardless of whether we feel like we're the man for the job, regardless if we feel like that we have what it takes, right? So that being said, how are we going to model for each other? How are we going to move forward for one another if we're not willing to take action, because we're allowing our fear to get in the way and paralyze us of taking action? So that's something that's just really been important to me, is taking action regardless of how terrified I am. I've had a lot of white knuckle road trips. I've just kind of white knuckled it through a lot over the last 20 years living with PTSD. I've decided that I'm not going to allow the fear to stop me. And it's been a journey in itself. And there are times where I am absolutely terrified. I'm afraid of being out on the open ocean. And there was a time my aunt had taken us on a cruise, and there I was out on this little sailboat. And to be honest with you, I think it's interesting when people say, oh, you can't have fear and love at the same time, or fear and joy, or fear, And I'm telling you what, you can. You can. I've experienced it. I'm sure many others of you that are listening have experienced it. I was on that sailboat down in Mexico. I think we were in Cabo, and the whales were out, and the boat drivers were like, check this out. And I was mesmerized. It was beautiful. It was the time of my life. And I was also trembling. My body was shaking in fear. So I was able to experience both that joy and that fear at the same time. And I'm grateful that I chose to step out in faith and get on that boat, and I got to have that experience that I would have missed out on had I not been able to walk through the fear to get to the other side. So that's my hope by doing this show today, is that I can encourage you to do the same and just take life by the horns, right? Take it by the horns and just go with it. So we're going to take a break again. When we get back, I'm going to be talking about thinking with our heart and loving with our head. See if I can get that correct. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio. I'm your host, Trish Smith of Pure Intuitive Talk, and we'll be back in a couple minutes. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. You're listening to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith, and you're tuned into Transformation Talk Radio. I'd also kind of like to throw a little shout out to Dr. Pat. Watching these shows on this network is really cool, and I'm really grateful for her creating the whole network and all of her people that run everything. I have yet to work with somebody in Dr. Pat's field here that I haven't just adored and appreciated. So Shout out to Transformation Talk Radio, super cool network, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. So we'll get back to talking about fear and love. So fear is my least favorite thing, and love is my favorite thing. So before we went to break, I was talking about thinking with your heart and loving with your head. So if we want to take a minute and just kind of soak that in, right? Thinking with our heart, loving with our head. What that means is, personally, I would like to watch the world operate by thinking from their heart. I believe that it's really important that we're moving forward from a heart space. I think that if we were moving forward from a heart space, like on a regular basis throughout our lives, that the entire world would look different. The relationships globally would look different, down to community, down to individual relationships. However, a lot of the times we are not thinking with our heart, we're thinking with our head. And especially in our culture here in the United States, a lot of times when we're thinking with our head, we're prioritizing finances over people. And we're prioritizing inanimate objects, and we're prioritizing the cars and the wealth and everything over human beings. And so I believe that if we're thinking from our heart, that we will be able to shift that, and we'll be thinking about people rather than things first. And there's a lot of people out there right now that are struggling. There's a lot of people having anxiety and depression and panic attacks, people experiencing PTSD. Autism is 1 in 40 now, people with autism. So we have a lot of mothers that are experiencing those challenges of raising children that are nonverbal at 12 years old, and with that comes behaviors. And guess what? They need support. Our friends and our family need support. So if we're thinking with our heart, and we have friends that have children with special needs, maybe we would call them and say, hey, sister, I think you could use a minute. Why don't I come over and hang out with your kids? And you can just, wander around, go for a little walk or whatever, and breathe for a minute. Because when you have children with special needs, you are always on duty. You're always on duty. You are supervising. Your life is making sure that they're safe. And so, but on the flip side of that, loving with our head is also important. I am personally a rescuer, guilty. I used to feel bad about it. The world has tried to make me feel bad about it for most of my life. But I'm going to wear the badge proudly now. I'm just going to call myself a rescue ranger and be like, you know what? It's all good. I'm not really worried about people thinking that I'm doing too much for people. I don't care anymore. So, but if we're not loving with our head, then sometimes we're making poor choices. And for example, maybe making a poor choice, if we're not using our head in love, we are staying in an abusive situation, and we are not being respected or valued in our relationships. So it's important to love with our head, to use our head in love. Sometimes too, maybe we believe it's love and it's really more trauma bonding, right? Or we do love the person, but if we're being abused in a relationship, we have to walk away. So there's a difference definitely between being in a relationship where you feel unheard or you feel unseen or they're busy. There's so many reasons why relationships aren't 100% amazing and magical like they are in the movies. However, we're all humans and we all have faults. And so in our relationships with our friends, our family, our spouses, overall, if they're a good person and they have some faults, guess what? At the end of the day, we have faults too. So I always figured I will expect my husband to be perfect when I'm perfect. So, so we've been together. We just celebrated our 24th anniversary since our first date. And people say, oh, wow, you guys are just perfect together and he's amazing. And it's like, sometimes I want to strangle him, and sometimes I'm sure he wants to strangle me, right? We drive each other nuts sometimes, but overall our relationship is really good. And overall, it's a benefit for both of us to stay in the relationship. And so in this marriage of mine, I am loving with my head and thinking with my heart. That being said, if somebody is in an abusive situation, then they need to get out, then they need to walk away. And those are deal breakers, right? But having the courage to forgive and move on when something is forgivable is very important. And that goes along with thinking with your heart and loving with your head. There are many times when we do offend each other as human beings, whether it's in a friendship or our partner. Myself, I've personally offended people in my life. I know that sounds super shocking, but I have offended people, and I like to go to them and apologize. And I appreciate when someone is able to forgive me. And I've just noticed, to me, it seems like, and the general population is lacking the capability to offer forgiveness in a lot of their relationships right now. So I was hoping to encourage our audience to consider that. Is there a place in your life that somebody has offended you or hurt your feelings, but at the end of the day, it's something very forgivable, and finding the place within ourselves to go, gosh, I love this person. I love this person so much. Maybe they offended me. Maybe I got into a place of fear where I was afraid of them hurting my feelings again. And I started to build these blocks to keep myself safe from being hurt again. Okay, well, how is that going to allow our relationship to move forward and find flow with each other again if we're allowing that fear to stand between us? So it's important that we take the time to go inside and look at it. Okay, I felt offended. Maybe I made more of a big deal of it than it was. Or maybe this person is really good to me. They didn't mean to say that. Not a big deal. I think for myself, I like to remember that there are relationships where people are being physically abused, they're being sexually abused. They are not valued at all in the relationship. And so I believe it's important to not be petty. I believe it's important to be able to forgive and move forward with our important relationships in our lives when those things are forgivable. And we all know that there are some things that are unforgivable. And there are people in this world that have been sexually abused as children and still are able to forgive the people that hurt them. So, so that being said, I want to remind all of us that in our relationships, if we're allowing that fear to take over, love can't win. Love cannot win if we're going to allow fear to consume us and consume our heart and be so afraid of being vulnerable that we have cold hearts. We become bitter. We start projecting our own fears onto our relationship, and then we start feeling more and more separate from the people that we love the most. And sadly, the person that's going to suffer the most is ourselves when we allow fear to live in our heart like that. But both people in relationship will suffer. And so if we can allow ourselves to move through those, forgive that person. Sometimes it's forgiving ourselves. Sometimes we have offended a person in our relationship and they've maybe even forgiven us, but we're hanging on to guilt and shame. And so it's important that we forgive ourselves so that we can go ahead and move forward in love. I think personally, my opinion is that forgiveness and love really go hand in hand. So if we're seeking to have really true, open, light, love relationships, there has to be a lot of forgiveness in there. And that's definitely loving with our head. So loving with our head is offering forgiveness, and thinking with our heart is saying, I'm willing to forgive. So the heart wants to be close. The heart wants to have connection. the fear and the insecurities get in the way of it. But we have to do our part. Nobody can do it for us, right? So if we want to be able to move forward in our lives and move toward our calling, if we want to move closer to the people that we love the most, it's our job to rid of these blocks. And we can do that energetically. We can do that with different tools. Energy is simple. So it's really a matter of like tuning into the different frequency. And if we've found ourselves living in a place of fear and we're allowing ourselves to be tuned into that fear frequency, it's really easy on an energetic level to shift into the love frequency. So the only way that we need to do that is to go ahead and tune in, recognize the frequency, feel it in our body, feel it in our bones. How does it feel? Where am I feeling it in my body? Is my chest feel tight? Is my breath shallow? Maybe my hands are shaking. And so if we can tune into that and recognize what that feels like inside of our bodies, and then we can take the time to tune into love and allow our body, mind, spirit to be in that frequency and just recognize the difference in how they feel, we can go inside at any time that we choose and shift from being in the frequency of fear to being in the frequency of love. And the more often that we do that, the more often that we stay tuned into that love frequency, the more that we'll watch our relationships grow in a healthy way, the more our blocks that we've created will dissolve. So that's just another trick or tool or technique that I use for myself. It's really just like turning a radio station. That's all it really is. So anyways, that being said, when we get back, I will be talking about seeking wise counsel, about supporting one another through our journeys. Sorry. It's time to go to break. I had to pay attention. So we're going to break now. My name is Trish Smith. I'm your host of Pure Intuitive Talk. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio, and we'll be back in just a minute. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Pure Intuitive Talk. I'm your host, Trish Smith, and you're listening to Transformation Talk Radio. Before we went to break, I was mentioning that it's important to seek wise counsel when we're asking for support and we're stepping out in faith into doing something new or in our relationships. So that being said, we have to be careful when we have a relationship, and if we're talking to people about it and getting people's opinions, we have to ensure that it is wise counsel we are seeking. I think many times we have people in our lives and we're having a hard time, and maybe we just kind of vent or we're talking about it. And sometimes they don't offer the most valuable opinion or advice. And so it's important that we're able to discern. It's important that we can weigh the opinions of others and make our own decision. For myself personally, I prefer to not ask advice from several people. I will work on my own inner dialogue and decide what I think is best, and then maybe talk to a couple of people, get some feedback from people that I really admire. And I always want it to be somebody that I would use as a model. So if I have someone in my life that I admire and I respect, and I've watched the way that they've either had a marriage or raised their children or whatever it is, that I have a lot of respect for the way that they're doing it, those are the people that I will ask for advice, or those are the people that I will bounce off of what I'm considering. So it's important not to ask everybody for their opinion. And now you feel even more discombobulated, because when it comes to matters of the heart, our heart is going to tell us. And we're going to be supported by the universe, by God, whatever you call, whatever the word is you use for it. But we're going to be supported by that. And so our ancestors and spirit is really there guiding us. So if we can tune in, we will find the answers within ourselves. And if we're in a place that we feel lost or confused or indecisive, and sometimes it's a heavy decision that we have to make, and it's important, if we are not in a place where we feel like we can trust ourselves, that we do seek wise counsel. But again, it's got to be wise counsel. It's got to be somebody that you would want to be like when you grow up. That's the person that you ask for help. That's the person that you ask for direction, rather than your friend who's going to say whatever you want to hear, or your friend who is maybe not living a life that you want to live. Maybe they're not the person that you ask for advice when it comes to moving through fear. So there is a lot of help out there. And to be honest with you, I'm loving all of the information at our fingertips regarding healing. So you can go on YouTube and pop up. There's so many free videos now, and there's so many tools. One of my favorite tools is the emotional freedom technique. It's called tapping or EFT, and we're doing our tapping, right, to help balance those meridians. So we're clearing energy from the 12 meridians in our body when we're doing that technique. You can go on YouTube. You can go on there. There's a lot of people with different videos. So there's so many free tools at our hands, and it's really just a matter of utilizing them. Another excellent technique is hypnosis. I know it sounds silly, but I myself had myself hypnotized to like vegetables, and it worked. And I have plenty of friends that have used hypnosis in the past to quit smoking, and they're not smoking. So if you go into your search engines and you search, maybe quitting alcohol or quitting cigarettes or whatever it is that you'd like, these habits or blocks that we're installing for ourselves that are keeping us from moving through our own fear, we can reprogram ourselves. And there's so many free tools on the internet to help us do that. So with hypnosis, you want to listen to those messages for at least 2 weeks, and you can put them on like while you're sleeping. You can put them on while you're relaxing, not while you're driving, but you can reprogram. And so helping to reprogram the brain to help ourselves remove the fear blocks, to help ourselves push through so that we can walk through the fear and get to the other side, letting love win. There's no reason not to utilize all these tools that are available to us for free at our fingertips. If you're looking for someone to work with, I have a practice, Pure Intuitive Guide. I work via Zoom. I also have my office here that I'm in. So if anybody is local, you can work with me in person. This is my super fun office that I put together. It was a shed when I started. And my husband and he wired it, and I helped him throw in the insulation, and we drywalled it and painted it and did the floor. And then I got to do the fun part of decorating it. So if you're local and you would like to reach out and have an in-person appointment, I would love to see you, and I would love to work with you and encourage you on your path of living in alignment. And if you are not in alignment with my personality, there's people out there that maybe you jive with that feel like that you have a connection with them. So it's always a good idea to bring in that resource when you're trying to work through a huge transition in your life. And from what I've witnessed over the last 3 years, most people are going through big transitions. So utilizing that help when you need it, right? It's kind of like when you've broken your ankle and you're on crutches, and then you get yourself off crutches. So I myself have also used counselors or psychologists or different people, shamanic practitioners, over the years when I'm in a place that I know I need that backup, right? Like you don't typically go like onto the battleground alone, right? You have the army that you're there with. And so kind of helping yourself create that army of moving through fear so that love starts winning in your own life is a very valuable tool. And I know it helps having friends. You can grab an accountability partner if maybe it's something like exercising you want to do. But if we're being honest, half the time when we're like, yeah, guys, let's do this, I mean, we all fall off, right? myself included. It's like, I'm going to get on that treadmill. And then, 3 months later, like, I was busy and I didn't get on the treadmill. So sometimes gaining support, hiring a person for that, whether it's a life coach or a, therapist or something, but they're being paid. So they're showing up every week. They're not like, oh my goodness, my toddler's sick and I can't make it today. So you have that guarantee. And so I would highly suggest, if you're not reaching out to me to make an appointment, finding someone to work with to get through those really sticky places in your life, because we all need that. And hopefully I've been able to encourage our audience enough here and there to help each other as friends and reach out, because at the end of the day, that's what friends are for, right? We're supposed to be supporting each other. There's one other thing I also wanted to talk about before we go. I know I don't have a whole lot of time, but if we could please stay tuned into our love frequency as much as possible. I'm hoping to kind of install in everybody's minds the fact that we have that capability, the fact that we have inside of ourselves at any given moment the opportunity to tune into love, to tune into light, and to be in that frequency. And the more that we do it, the more that we will witness the miracles around us. If we are willing to be God's hands and feet, if we are willing to reach out and support one another and help one another, we get to be witness to each other's experiences and each other's growth by being that for one another. So I know I say it on every show, but it's really where my heart's at. It's really important to me that I can inspire people to just be better and better to each other all the time. I've only got 2 minutes left. Thank you, everybody. I also wanted to say thank you for everybody that tuned in to my last show when I was with my friend Lorraine. That was fun. She's she's a lot of fun. It's interesting because she and I are so different. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about some of my friends, is that we're so different and we get to learn so much from each other. But thank you, everybody, for the beautiful comments. I'm not going to lie, I cried when I read them, and it was a very beautiful feeling knowing that I was able to provide some inspiration for people, and that just makes my heart sing. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and please go over to Trish Smith Guide on YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to Transformation Talk Radio. I'm your host of Pure Intuitive Talk, Trish Smith, and that's it. Thank you for listening to Pure Intuitive Talk with me, Trish Smith, your Pure Intuitive Guide. Come back and join us for encouragement to take responsibility and to connect to your whole being. Remember that every moment is the right moment to choose peace, acceptance, and forgiveness. We all have the courage to look deep within, get real with ourselves, and make upgrades to our ways of interacting with the world. It's been my privilege to share this hour with you. For more information about me, go to pureintuitiveguide.com. That's pureintuitiveguide.com. Thanks again, and we will see you here next time on Transformation Talk Radio.